Welcome to Dead Quiet Mysteries, the place where every cold case, chilling crime, and unsolved mystery is brought back to life. From vanished persons to twisted betrayals, we dig deep into the unknown to uncover the truth that others left buried. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us which city and country you're watching from. We love seeing how far the mystery travels. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you never miss a case. Because here, some truths are only heard in the dead quiet. Hercule Poirot and Death in Cabin 9. Chapter 1. A first-class compartment. Hercule Poirot adjusted the immaculate cuffs of his dove-grey travelling suit and stepped onto platform 4 of Paddington Station with the measured grace of a man who considered punctuality the twin of civilization. Around him, the station thrummed with the usual weekday symphony, clattering trunks, shrill whistles, the low hum of waiting engines, and that curious blend of nervous anticipation particular to long journeys. Before him stood the Seabreeze Express, its polished green and gold carriages gleaming under the grey morning light. The name was elegantly stenciled across the dining car in cursive lettering that suggested both dignity and discretion. "A train that understands how to behave," murmured Poirot approvingly. The porter, a lanky youth with untied shoelaces, ushered Poirot to the first-class carriage. "You'll be in cabin 6, sir. Facing the seaside, they say, and you've a full dining reservation." "Merci, mon ami, and my trunk?" "Already aboard, sir." With a polite nod, Poirot ascended the brass-railed steps and entered the corridor. The scent of polished mahogany and aged leather was immediately pleasing, mingling faintly with the delicate aroma of pipe tobacco and fresh upholstery. The Seabreeze Express had been recently refurbished, and it showed no vulgar modernity, just a subtle nod to elegance gone slightly faded. Cabin 6 was, in Poirot's eyes, perfectly proportioned, a wide upholstered seat in emerald velvet, a small writing desk with notepaper embossed with the train's emblem, and a well-positioned window that framed the departure platform like a painting in a gilt frame. He settled in with a contented sigh. For 2 days, nothing but the sound of the wheels, the sea beyond the cliffs, and a good tisane at bedtime, a most agreeable retreat. But, of course, retreats seldom stayed tranquil in the presence of murder. As the train exhaled a gentle hiss of steam and began to slide forward with determined dignity, Poirot's gaze wandered across the corridor. The door to cabin 9 opposite his remained slightly ajar, revealing a flash of maroon suede heels, the edge of a cream wool coat, and a cascade of honey-blonde hair falling over a leather valise. The young woman inside appeared absorbed in applying lipstick in the mirror, her hand steady, her face angled, with practiced nonchalance. "A lady accustomed to being observed," Poirot remarked to himself. Moments later, the woman stepped into the corridor. She was striking, not merely pretty, but magnetic. Her coat was exquisitely tailored, her gloves pearl-buttoned, and her perfume subtle yet arresting, like crushed violets after rain. "Hercule Poirot?" she asked, her voice lilting with a faint American inflection. He inclined his head. "At your service, mademoiselle." "I thought so. I saw your photo in the sketch once. I'm Virginia Frobisher. I suppose this is the safest train in England now." Poirot smiled. "Let us hope that your estimation is correct. But you travel alone, mademoiselle?" "Alone, yes, but not unaccompanied. My fiancé is aboard, though he's sulking somewhere in the smoking car. Men don't take kindly to being out-earned, even if they say they do." With that, she flashed a smile, brilliant and brittle, and disappeared down the corridor in a wave of expensive scent and confident steps. Poirot's interest was piqued, but not stirred. Many women wore confidence like perfume, some to allure, some to conceal. He had learned long ago that the difference often meant life or death. Later, in the observation lounge, Poirot took his tisane beside the window, where the countryside unfurled in autumnal gold and russet. He was joined by a cluster of fellow travellers, a retired colonel, blustering and red-faced, a young woman with librarian spectacles and trembling hands, who introduced herself softly as Miss Judith Rayner, and an older lady with a keen, narrow face and a notebook always poised, Mrs. Letitia Crowhurst, a novelist of respectable but unpopular fiction. As the conversation moved to politics and the weather, Poirot listened more than he spoke. It was a skill few cultivated. "And you, Monsieur Poirot?" asked Mrs. Crowhurst, tilting her head. "Are you working a case, or is this—" She waved a hand at the countryside. "Just your idea of leisure?" Poirot chuckled modestly. "It is my intention to do absolutely nothing. But alas, the intentions of Hercule Poirot often encounter resistance from fate." The colonel snorted. "Sounds like you're inviting trouble." Non, Poirot said mildly. "But if trouble insists on boarding this train, I shall greet it with due courtesy." As the sun dipped below the hedgerows and evening drew its velvet curtain across the windows, the train paused briefly at a rural station. A tall man in a worn overcoat entered carriage A. His stride was confident but heavy, as though bearing burdens. He tipped his hat at the conductor and disappeared into the corridor. "New passenger?" asked Miss Rayner, her voice tinged with something more than curiosity. "Inspector Farrow," Mrs. Crowhurst supplied. "I saw his name on the crew manifest. Strange to see him on a holiday line." Poirot's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Indeed," he murmured, sipping the last of his tisane. When Poirot returned to his cabin, a faint perfume still lingered in the air. Virginia's, no doubt, drifting under his door. Yet something tugged at him. A sense, not of danger, but of imbalance, as though a picture had been hung slightly crooked, or a door closed 1 inch too firmly. In the quiet, rhythmic clatter of the train wheels, Poirot allowed himself to drift into thought. Not sleep. No, Hercule Poirot did not sleep lightly when something was off. Chapter 2. Death in Cabin 9. The Seabreeze Express stirred into a languid dawn beneath a sky tinged with misted lilac and pewter grey. Outside the windows, the English countryside blurred softly past, hedgerows silvered with dew, fields asleep under fog. Inside, the train moved with quiet assurance, its first-class compartments undisturbed by anything save the gentle rhythm of the rails. Poirot, precise as ever, had already bathed, shaved, and arranged his cravat to symmetrical satisfaction. He had just adjusted the fold of his handkerchief when a knock rattled his cabin door, hurried, uneven, and followed immediately by the steward's anxious voice. "Monsieur Poirot, pardon, but we need you, sir." Poirot opened the door to find Simon Brock, the first-class steward, uncharacteristically flushed and dishevelled. The lines of professionalism had blurred around his features, and his fingers fidgeted with the buttons of his waistcoat. Poirot frowned. "Something has occurred?" Brock nodded stiffly. It's Miss Frobisher, cabin 9. She hasn't responded since the tea service was cleared last night. We thought perhaps she was sleeping late, but—" He paused, swallowing. "The door is locked from the inside, and the conductor had to force it open." "And," said Poirot, already stepping into the corridor. "She's dead, sir." Poirot said nothing, but quickened his pace. 2 carriages down, a small cluster of passengers had begun to gather, drawn by the rising tension. Mrs. Crowhurst stood nearest the cabin door, a shawl tight across her narrow shoulders, notebook in hand. Judith Rayner hovered by the window, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her expression unreadable. "Back, please. Allow Monsieur Poirot through," came the conductor's voice, stern but restrained. Inside cabin 9, the air hung still and cloying, tinged faintly with the scent of perfume and something else, bitter, metallic, unpleasant. Virginia Frobisher lay on her bed, still in her ivory silk nightgown, her blonde hair splayed artfully on the embroidered pillow. Her eyes were closed, her expression peaceful. But Poirot needed only a glance to know that peace was illusory. On the bedside table, sat an empty crystal tumbler, rim stained faintly pink. A travel-sized carafe of tonic water remained beside it, unopened. The steward murmured, "She asked for a special cordial last night, sir." A nightcap, her own bottle, brought it aboard herself. I only fetched the glass. Poirot examined the scene closely. There were no signs of disturbance. The furniture sat untouched, the curtains drawn halfway. The suitcase, still latched, rested neatly by the writing desk. But on the carpet, slightly to the left of the bed, lay a single pearl, small, round and gleaming dully in the filtered morning light. "Mon Dieu," Poirot muttered under his breath. He turned to the conductor. "You say the door was locked from the inside?" "Yes, sir. Bolt engaged, no sign of it being tampered with. The window was shut, but not latched. We had to use the emergency key." Poirot moved to the window, inspected the narrow latch, then glanced outside. The train was crossing a viaduct now, slow and steady. Wind stirred the velvet drapes faintly. He noted the sill, dry and clean, no marks, no footprints. "Where is the bottle from which she poured her drink?" Brock hesitated. "We can't find it, sir." A flicker passed across Poirot's features. "So, a cordial that does not remain, a pearl that should not be there, a death that is too serene." He gestured gently. "Close the door. We must not permit further contamination." Inspector Farrow boarded the train at Exeter, summoned hastily from the local force. A man in his early 50s, square-jawed and methodical, he exuded the calm certainty of provincial authority. "I understand you were on board, Monsieur Poirot," he said after introductions, with a smile that was nearly respectful. "I shan't step on any toes. Feel free to assist." Poirot inclined his head. "I do not assist, Inspector, I observe, until the truth requires declaration." Farrow blinked. "Yes, quite." By late morning, all passengers in the first-class carriages had been asked to remain available for interviews. Poirot, meanwhile, moved discreetly from cabin to cabin, not interrogating but noting. Miss Judith Rayner's hands trembled when he asked how she had slept. "I heard voices last night," she murmured, "just after midnight. 2 people arguing. A woman, sharp, insistent, and a man. I think he was crying." Poirot looked at her intently. "Did you recognize the voices?" She hesitated. "No, or perhaps I didn't want to." Mrs. Crowhurst was far less vague. "I saw a woman in a blue dressing gown leaving cabin 9, she declared. "Around 12:30. I couldn't see her face. The light was dim, and I didn't think much of it at the time. But now—" "Did you follow her?" "Of course not. But I'm sure it wasn't Miss Frobisher herself. This woman moved differently, quieter, hesitant." When Poirot inquired further, she added with a sniff, "Miss Rayner wears such a gown. I glimpsed it when she stepped out for her morning paper yesterday." Captain Sellers, overheard grumbling in the smoking car, dismissed the whole affair. Another society girl with secrets, they always fall on their own swords eventually. Poirot paid more attention to the steward. Simon Brock appeared calm now, too calm. His recollection of the prior evening was precise, almost rehearsed. "She requested the drink at 9:45. I didn't see the bottle, just brought the glass and the water she asked for." Poirot asked softly, "And when you returned the glass this morning?" "I found it empty, just as you saw." "Nothing spilled?" "No, sir." Poirot's moustache twitched slightly. He returned to cabin 9. This time he focused on the writing desk. A leather-bound notepad bore the indentation of something torn away. He tilted the page, angling the light, revealing partial outlines, curved letters and broken lines. "If anything happens to me," he read aloud quietly. A confession, perhaps, or a warning. The sheet had been taken, likely burned. But Poirot, meticulous in all things, did not need ink to understand meaning. As the train crossed into coastal Cornwall, salt in the breeze and gulls in the air, Poirot stared out at the silver horizon. "Mademoiselle Frobisher," he whispered, "you brought danger with you. But who, I wonder, feared you more, the one you betrayed, or the one you loved? Behind him, a second pearl rolled softly across the carpet. Chapter 3. The Woman in Blue. The Seabreeze Express rolled southward along the cliffs of Devon, the grey waters of the Channel flashing intermittently between folds of mist. Inside the train, however, the mood had grown noticeably darker. The once lively first-class lounge was now subdued, voices hushed, eyes watchful. The death of Virginia Frobisher had cast a long shadow, and it had fallen unevenly across each of the passengers. Poirot sat in the observation car, hands tented beneath his chin, a cup of chocolate untouched beside him. Across the aisle, Miss Judith Rayner stared out the window, her reflection pale and ghost-like in the glass. She held a book open on her lap, but had not turned a page in half an hour. Poirot broke the silence. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you did not sleep well last night, non?" She looked up quickly, startled. "Number, I suppose. None of us did." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "You said you heard voices?" Judith's eyes darted away. "Yes, a quarrel. A man and a woman. I can't say who." "You are certain it was not Miss Frobisher and her fiancé?" Her lips pressed together. "I've never heard Mr. Lennox raise his voice." Poirot leaned forward. "It is not the voice that is raised which reveals the most, mademoiselle. It is the one that breaks." Before she could answer, Mrs. Crowhurst entered the lounge, notebook in hand, a self-satisfied expression upon her face. "I've just spoken with Inspector Farrow," she announced, to no one in particular. "Apparently he's confirmed that the window latch in cabin 9 was not secured. Someone could have entered, or exited, without using the door." Judith stiffened. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That is true, madame. But one must ask, if one goes to the trouble of committing a crime through the window, why leave the door locked from the inside? Such finesse does not usually accompany such clumsiness." "Unless it was a suicide," Judith murmured. Mrs. Crowhurst laughed softly. "Oh, no, my dear. Miss Frobisher may have been many things, spoiled, conceited, reckless, but suicidal, never. No woman who wears pearls to bed wishes to leave the world unseen." Poirot did not respond. Instead, he glanced downward. On the floor beneath the sofa, half tucked under a velvet cushion, lay a torn scrap of pale blue silk. He bent and retrieved it carefully. "A thread from a dressing gown, perhaps?" he said aloud. Mrs. Crowhurst gave a little gasp. "That must be it. That's the same shade Judith wears. The woman I saw last night, she was in blue." Judith flushed, her voice rising. "I told you I never left my cabin." Poirot turned the scrap over. "And yet this thread did." The silence that followed was brittle. Moments later, Mr. Alfred Lennox entered the lounge, still wearing the same suit from the previous evening. The lines around his mouth had deepened, but he carried himself with the air of a man trying desperately to maintain control. He bowed stiffly to Poirot. "I assume you're assisting the police?" "Assisting? Number observing?" "Always," Poirot replied with a faint smile. "I didn't kill her," Lennox said flatly, as if daring someone to contradict him. "Mais non. If you had, monsieur, I doubt very much you would make the declaration so openly." Lennox sat heavily across from him. "Virginia could be difficult. She had a way of twisting things, making people feel small. She never meant it, not always, but she was sharp." Poirot waited. "She wanted to marry me. I never quite said yes. She liked the appearance of a fiancé more than the reality." Poirot studied the man carefully. "Yet she believed herself engaged." "She assumed," Lennox said curtly. "That assumption may have cost her something far greater than pride," Poirot murmured. At that moment, the steward, Simon Brock, entered, carrying a tray of tea. He hesitated as he saw the group, then forced a neutral expression. "Would anyone care for refreshment?" he offered. "No, thank you," said Judith quickly. Lennox waved him away. Only Mrs. Crowhurst accepted a cup. Poirot rose slowly. Monsieur Brock, a moment, if you please." In the corridor, Poirot's voice lowered. "You said Miss Frobisher requested a nightcap, a cordial?" "Yes, sir," the steward replied cautiously. "She had her own bottle, as I mentioned. She handed it to me wrapped in a handkerchief and asked me to bring her a tumbler and some tonic. She said she'd pour it herself." "And the bottle, where is it now?" "Gone, sir. We can't find it." Poirot nodded. "The handkerchief?" "I returned it with the glass. Pale linen, monogrammed initials?" Brock hesitated. L.R. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Curious. And to whom on this train, monsieur, do those initials belong?" The steward was silent. Poirot stepped a little closer. "The devil, monsieur, is in the details. Always." Returning to his cabin, Poirot sat down at his desk and opened a small notebook. He made 3 entries in his precise hand. Woman in blue, seen at 12:30 a.m., pearl on carpet, corridor or struggle, cordial bottle missing. Who benefits? He paused, then added, L.R., false initials. A soft knock came at the door. Judith Rayner stood in the corridor, eyes shining, voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, I think I know who the handkerchief belongs to." Poirot did not speak. He merely raised his eyebrows. She looked over her shoulder. "I think it was placed in Virginia's cabin deliberately, to point at someone who no longer exists." Poirot inclined his head. "Mademoiselle, I am beginning to think you know more than you have said." Her lips trembled. "If I speak now, someone will make me disappear too." Poirot stepped aside. "Then speak quickly, and let Hercule Poirot ensure that no one disappears again." Chapter 4. The Locked Door Puzzle. The rhythmic murmur of the train continued, steady as a heartbeat, as the Seabreeze Express wound its way through the wind-swept moors of southern Devon. But inside its polished carriages, the atmosphere had turned cold and brittle, like porcelain stretched too thin. Hercule Poirot stood once again inside cabin 9, his grey eyes narrowed, hands clasped behind his back. The scent of fading perfume still lingered, mingling faintly with the sharp tang of disinfectant left by the railway physician. Virginia Frobisher's body had been removed at Exeter, yet the room remained sealed, untouched, since Poirot had last left it, save by the conductor under Farrow's supervision. It was now, in this deliberate stillness, that Poirot worked best, without noise, without movement. The silence made truth louder. He examined the door first. The lock was of standard make, brass-plated with an interior bolt, unlatched only with the train's master key or from within. Inspector Farrow had already confirmed it bore no sign of tampering. The only access, therefore, must have been either by the window or by deception. But Poirot had other suspicions. He turned to the small writing desk where the blotting pad still bore the faint outline of a message hastily torn away. Earlier attempts had revealed partial words, "If anything happens to me," but the remaining indentations were too faint. Poirot removed a slender pencil from his waistcoat, tilted the blotter in the angled light, and gently rubbed across it sideways. A second line emerged, faint, broken, but clear. Not an accident. L will lie. "Ah," Poirot whispered, his moustache twitching. "L will lie? But which L? Lennox? Or someone else entirely?" He made a note of it in his little black notebook, underlined it twice, then turned toward the small wash-basin cabinet. At first glance, nothing unusual, but Poirot, always attentive to alignment, noticed the glass tumbler was not centered on the tray. Its base had left a circular ring, dry now but slightly pink-hued at the edges. He picked up the glass and held it against the light. No odor, no residue. But on the inside, near the rim, was the faintest trace of lipstick, like the ghost of a kiss. Poirot's brows lifted. "Madame Frobisher wore crimson," he said aloud. "This is mauve." He placed the glass carefully back and turned to the floor, where the second pearl had been discovered earlier that morning. He crouched. Beneath the narrow edge of the carpet, just near the skirting board, was a slender metal object, half hidden, a tiny silver cufflink engraved with the letter R. He picked it up delicately. "Not a woman's," he said, "and not Miss Frobisher's. So who drops a cufflink, loses a pearl, and leaves a lipstick mark that does not match the victim?" As he rose, a shadow darkened the corridor. Inspector Farrow appeared at the doorway. "Any progress, Monsieur Poirot?" "Progress? Mais oui. We have passed from confusion into complexity. That is often the halfway point." Farrow frowned. "Still no murder weapon, no confession, no clear motive." Poirot shook his head. "On the contrary, we have motives in abundance. Mademoiselle Judith fears for her life, Monsieur Lennox fears for his reputation, Madame Crowhurst fears irrelevance, and someone quite close, fears the truth." Farrow crossed his arms. "And the locked room?" "Ah," Poirot said softly. "The heart of the matter?" He motioned for Farrow to join him at the window. "You see, mon ami, the window was closed, yes, but not latched, and the latch is stiff. Observe." He tugged gently. It resisted slightly before snapping into place with a metallic click. "Only someone familiar with the mechanism would leave it unlatched," Poirot said. "An amateur would slam it shut. But a steward, or a former passenger, might know its tricks." Farrow scowled. "Are you implying someone climbed in from the outside?" Poirot smiled. "Not at all. I imply that someone wanted us to think so. A false trail, a clever illusion." He gestured to the dressing gown hanging behind the door. "Blue silk, monogrammed with J.R., so convenient," he said, "that the only visible dressing gown matches the description of the mysterious figure seen at night." Farrow's eyes narrowed. "You think it was planted?" "I think," Poirot said slowly, "that someone wore this gown not to stay warm but to be seen, and that person was not Mademoiselle Rayner." He turned suddenly. "I must examine Miss Rayner's luggage." Farrow nodded reluctantly. "I'll make the request." Moments later, Poirot was seated beside a trunk in Judith Rayner's cabin. The governess-like woman stood nervously to the side, her hands twisted tightly at her waist. "You don't think I did it?" she asked, voice barely audible. Poirot lifted a delicate silk scarf from her case. "No, mademoiselle, but I believe you know who did." Judith sat down abruptly. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid if I said something it would all come back." Poirot waited. She glanced toward the closed door, then leaned forward. "Virginia, she told me something yesterday. Something she found in her mother's things, a letter. It mentioned a man who used a false name, who disappeared before she was born." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "She said she thought he was aboard this train. Did she name him?" Judith shook her head, number only, that he had been someone dangerous, someone her mother once loved. Poirot closed the suitcase. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have been more helpful than you know." Back in his cabin, Poirot sat down, folded his hands and closed his eyes. A letter, a false name, a poisoned cordial, a dressing gown planted to frame another, a locked door, and yet a murder, not of opportunity, but of preparation. He rose and pressed the service bell. Moments later, Simon Brock, the steward, appeared. "Ah," Poirot said cheerfully. "A final question, monsieur. Where were you between 11 and midnight the night Miss Frobisher died?" The man hesitated. I was in the dining car, cleaning up." Poirot tilted his head. "Curious, because I believe a certain passenger saw someone in a steward's uniform heading toward cabin 9 at 5 minutes past 11. Simon's face paled. Poirot's voice lowered. "The uniform, monsieur, is easy to borrow. The truth, less so." And with that, he closed the cabin door softly. Chapter 5. The Disappearing Bottle. The Seabreeze Express curved like a ribbon of steel through the moorlands of Cornwall, now only a few hours from its final destination. But inside the train, destination was no longer the concern. The passengers' focus had narrowed, sharpened, drawn into the single unresolved point that hovered, ghost-like, in every cabin. Who killed Virginia Frobisher? Hercule Poirot sat alone in the dining car, a half-eaten croissant growing cold on his plate, his little grey cells turning over details like puzzle tiles. All around him, subtle changes had taken root. Passengers spoke less freely, curtains were pulled more tightly, the silverware no longer clinked against plates with cheerful carelessness. He glanced up as Inspector Farrow entered, and took the seat opposite him with a weary sigh. "Still no sign of the cordial bottle," Farrow said, rubbing his temples. "We searched the steward's supplies, every service cart, every bin. It's vanished." Poirot stirred his coffee gently. "But of course it has. It was never meant to be found." Farrow looked up sharply. "You think it was planted? Removed after the fact?" Poirot gave a small nod. "I think the bottle never existed as we were led to believe, and that the person who removed it counted on our fixation with its presence." Farrow frowned. "But she asked for it, didn't she?" "Did she?" Poirot asked softly. "We have only the steward's word for it, and now a bottle has disappeared, unseen, with no fingerprints, no label, no proof." Farrow exhaled heavily. "All right, let's assume she never requested it. What does that tell us?" "That someone knew how to gain access to her cabin, quietly, quickly, someone who could place a drink and be believed, someone who belonged." At that moment, Mrs. Letitia Crowhurst entered the dining car. She wore a violet hat, tilted too far left, and held her notebook like a priest holds scripture. Upon seeing Poirot, she glided over and sat, uninvited. "I have something," she said, her eyes gleaming. "A discovery." Poirot offered a gracious smile. "You are a font of information, madame." She beamed. "Virginia had an argument on the platform, just before boarding. I saw it, with a man. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I remember the coat, black, double-breasted, rather military in cut. He leaned close to her and hissed something. I saw her flinch." Poirot's interest sharpened. "And did you see this man aboard the train?" Mrs. Crowhurst pursed her lips. "Number, but I did see that same coat hanging in the luggage rack outside the second-class lavatory this morning. I made a note of it." Farrow stood abruptly. "We'll check the second-class compartments." But Poirot waved a hand. "Not yet. Tell me, madame, what colour was his hair?" "Dark," she said instantly. "Slicked back, quite distinguished." Poirot's eyes flicked upward. "And his shoes?" She blinked. "His shoes?" Poirot smiled. "Precisely," she faltered, colour rising in her cheeks. I didn't see." Poirot inclined his head politely. "Observation is a noble art, madame, but when it fails, invention too easily fills the gap." Mrs. Crowhurst rose in a huff and exited. Farrow raised an eyebrow. "She lied? About the argument?" "Non," Poirot said. "But about recognizing the man, oui. She did not see his face, but I suspect someone did." Back in the lounge, Miss Judith Rayner sat near the fireplace, knees drawn slightly inward, her fingers tightly gripping a leather-bound book. Poirot approached, and she looked up, startled. "Mademoiselle, may I sit?" She nodded, and he took the seat beside her. "This morning," he began gently, "you told me Virginia discovered a letter. A secret connected to her mother." Judith hesitated. "Yes." "Did she name the man?" Judith's voice dropped to a whisper. "She said she believed the man was aboard the train, but she hadn't confronted him. Not yet." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Did she trust you?" "She didn't trust many people, but yes, I think she did." Poirot leaned closer. "Then tell me, did she mention a name, even a part of one?" Judith drew in a shaky breath. "She said the name had been changed, that it used to begin with L." Poirot nodded slowly. "A man with a different name? A bottle that cannot be found, a pearl on the carpet, all part of the same painting, but the brush has lied." Judith looked confused. "What do you mean?" Poirot rose. "Come, there is something we must examine together." He led her down the corridor to the luggage hold. After a brief conversation with the conductor, Poirot was granted access to the trunk storage bay. Rows of neatly labelled luggage lined the compartment, fastened securely in place. Poirot moved with care, scanning names until he stopped before a medium-sized case with a label that read, Mr. Lionel Ross, reserved cabin, 14. Judith gasped. That's not anyone I've met on board. Indeed, Poirot murmured. That is because cabin 14 is empty, and yet this luggage was loaded at Paddington. He gestured to Farrow, who had followed them. Open it, please. With a nod, Farrow snapped open the brass locks. Inside, neatly folded underclothes, a shaving kit, and a dark bottle wrapped in linen. Poirot reached in and retrieved it. The label read, Cordial Number 7, Herbal Elixir not to be taken without dilution. Farrow read it aloud. Well, well. Poirot smiled. Behold, the vanishing bottle. It was never meant to be in Virginia's cabin. It was removed before discovery, hidden in a case no one would connect to a real passenger. Judith stared. But whose is it? Poirot lifted a single glove from the trunk. Inside the cuff was a stitched name, L. Redgrave. Poirot nodded. The man Virginia feared. The name she found. The original name of the steward, Simon Brock. Judith's breath caught. She said she was going to confront him that night. Poirot replaced the glove carefully. She did, and he silenced her before she could speak aloud what she had discovered. Inspector Farrow stared at the trunk, visibly shaken. We'll detain him immediately. Poirot raised a hand. Not yet, mon ami. Let him move freely for now. When one knows he is watched, he grows careful. But when he believes he has escaped, then he grows careless. Judith clutched her coat tighter. Then what do we do? Poirot's eyes gleamed. We prepare a trap, a subtle one, with threads, pearls, and memory. Chapter 6. A trap laid in velvet. The Seabreeze Express surged forward beneath an overcast sky, its polished carriages now feeling more like gilded cages than luxurious retreat. Passengers lingered in corners, casting nervous glances down corridors, whispering too softly and too often. And Hercule Poirot, supreme in stillness, waited. He had laid no overt accusations, not yet. But a careful observer would have noticed his movements had grown more exacting, more deliberate. He paused longer at thresholds. He measured footsteps in hallways. He adjusted his cuffs more often, not from vanity, but from thought. Now, just after the midday luncheon, Poirot stood in cabin 9, empty, but undisturbed. On the writing desk he had placed a duplicate of the cordial bottle, one he had quietly filled, with coloured water and sealed with wax. It gleamed faintly in the muted light, bearing the same label, Cordial Number 7. Bait, Poirot murmured. Inspector Farrow stood behind him, arms folded. You really believe he'll try to retrieve it? Poirot smiled without turning. If you remove a weapon once, you will remove it again when you believe it has reappeared. Guilt fears exposure more than it fears justice. He closed the door softly and left it unlatched. Then he returned to the observation lounge, now quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of cards or turning of a newspaper page. Captain Sellers sat reading, a glass of sherry untouched at his elbow. Mrs. Crowhurst was scribbling furiously, though Poirot suspected most of her ink had gone to invention. Judith Rayner occupied the far end, arms crossed, eyes dark with tension. The steward, Simon Brock, still carrying his name like a borrowed coat, entered the car, his silver tray balanced flawlessly as ever. Yet Poirot saw it, a flicker in the eye, a tightening of the jaw, when the steward noticed Judith's watchful gaze. And again, when he passed Poirot, there was a slight hesitation, no more than a heartbeat, but for Poirot, it might as well have been a confession. Everything is well, monsieur? Brock asked smoothly. Poirot gave him a mild nod. Perfectly. And you, monsieur? I serve, sir, that is all. Indeed, said Poirot, and yet one may serve many masters. He left the lounge a moment later, not looking back. 2 carriages away, in the corridor just outside cabin 9, Poirot paused, The carriage was momentarily empty. The others were at tea. He crouched beside the porthole and waited, not like a cat, but like a chess player, watching for the inevitable move. The handle of the cabin door turned, slowly, with infinite care. Poirot did not move. The door eased open. A figure in uniform slipped inside and closed it again, quickly but silently. Poirot rose and signalled. Inspector Farrow and two railway officials stepped out from a neighbouring compartment where they'd been concealed behind a curtain. Inside, they found Simon Brock standing at the writing desk, his gloved hand just an inch from the bottle. He turned slowly. His face was composed, but only just. "I was checking for missing items," he said flatly. Poirot stepped forward. "Mais non, monsieur, you were ensuring your past stayed buried, but it is too late. The name Redgrave is known to us now, as is the glove in your luggage, and the fact that you disappeared 20 years ago from a very different life." Simon's expression shifted, first to fury, then to something else entirely. Calculation. He smiled faintly. "You have no proof I poisoned her?" "Non." Poirot's voice remained soft. "The pearls you removed from her neck in a panic. One was left behind, the cufflink that fell when you fled too quickly, the glass that bears lipstick not her own. Yours, monsieur, from a costume you used to frame another." Simon scoffed. "She drank something she shouldn't have, that's hardly my doing." Poirot's eyes glittered. "You knew what she had found. The letter, the name. You knew she was going to confront you, and in her death, you saw protection." Simon said nothing. Then suddenly he made a lunge, not at Poirot, but at Judith, who had appeared at the end of the corridor. She screamed, stumbled back against the wall, but Farrow was faster. He intercepted the blow, forcing Simon to the ground in one swift movement. There was no struggle, not really. Moments later, he was escorted under guard to a secure carriage at the rear. Poirot turned to Judith, who was visibly shaken. He meant to silence me," she whispered. "Yes," Poirot said gently, "because you are the last witness to Virginia's truth." She steadied herself. "Thank you for not letting him succeed." Poirot nodded, and they returned to the lounge. But the Seabreeze Express had not yet exhausted its secrets. That evening, as the sky turned the colour of faded parchment, Poirot retired to his cabin. He had barely settled into his chair when a knock rapped softly on the door. It was Alfred Lennox. "I suppose," he began tightly, "you think I'm in the clear now?" Poirot gestured for him to sit. "Let us say, monsieur, that the crime has been revealed. But crimes, like people, sometimes travel in pairs." Lennox frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Poirot leaned forward. "I know of the letter Virginia sent to her solicitor last week. I have made inquiries. In it, she announced her intention to rewrite her will." Lennox's face paled. She was upset, emotional. She wasn't thinking straight. "She was thinking very clearly, monsieur. She intended to remove your name. The engagement was never real, not to her, but to you. It was lucrative." Lennox stood quickly. "You can't prove anything." "No," Poirot said. "But I can arrange for the letter to be found, and I imagine the solicitor will recall the visit, especially when shown her handwriting." He tapped his temple. "Your motive may not have manifested in murder, monsieur, but in silence, in pressure, in quiet cruelty. You bear guilt of another kind." Lennox left without a word. Later that evening, Poirot sat alone in the dining car once more. Outside, the sea had darkened. The train moved on, unrelenting. Farrow approached. "He'll be tried in Truro," he said, "under the name Redgrave." Poirot nodded. "The man he tried so hard to erase." "And Lennox?" Poirot sipped his tisane. "He will lose what he hoped to gain. That is justice of another flavour." He looked out the window. "The sea takes many things, Inspector. Secrets, names, sometimes lives. But truth, it always floats back to the surface." Chapter 7. The Final Arrangement. The Seabreeze Express moved into its final stretch, approaching the rugged western coast of Cornwall. Outside, the sky was iron grey and low, the sea dark and restless beneath it. Inside the train, a heavy quiet had descended, as though the murder of Virginia Frobisher had seeped into the panelled walls and silenced even the gossipers. Yet in Hercule Poirot's mind, the fog had lifted. He stood alone in the observation car, which now held a chill despite the plush velvet and brass fixtures. The rhythmic sway of the train had grown familiar, hypnotic, but Poirot's mind danced over every image, every phrase, every discarded object, like a conductor reviewing a symphony's final bars. It was all there, the motive, the means, the manipulation. But there remained one final detail, one delicate thread that had not yet been tied. He turned as Judith Rayner entered the car, her steps hesitant. "You sent for me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Oui, mademoiselle. Sit, if you please." She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. "There is one matter," he said, "that I require clarity on before I summon everyone for the final explanation." Judith paled slightly. "Another matter?" Poirot studied her face. "It concerns you, mademoiselle." She drew a sharp breath. "I've told you everything. About the letter. About Virginia's suspicion." "Yes, and you have been remarkably brave, but it is not what you have said that troubles me. It is what you did not say." He took a small object from his coat pocket and placed it gently on the table between them. A silver necklace chain, delicate, broken at the clasp. Judith stared at it. "I don't understand." "You wore this the day we boarded," Poirot said softly. "A small locket hung from it, one you never removed, not even at tea. But yesterday it was gone. Why?" She swallowed. I must have lost it." Poirot shook his head. "No, you removed it, deliberately." Her silence was answer enough. Poirot continued, gently but firmly. "Virginia confided in you more than you admitted, and you gave her something, your locket, to hide the letter." Judith's hands trembled. "Yes," she whispered. "I was afraid someone would search her room. She tucked the letter inside it. She said she'd wear it to sleep just in case." Poirot nodded slowly. "And that is why, after her death, it was missing." She met his gaze, tears rising. "I found the chain broken on the floor outside her cabin. I didn't know what to do. I thought the killer might realize she'd hidden something inside it. And the locket itself? I slid it beneath a floorboard in the steward's storeroom." Poirot rose at once. "Come." Together they crossed to the rear service carriage, where Poirot enlisted Farrow's assistance. With a flick of the steward's key, the door opened. Judith, now pale and shaking, pointed to a loose plank beneath the supply shelf. Farrow prized it up. There, wrapped in linen, lay the missing locket. Inside was the folded letter, creased, faded, but legible. Poirot took it and read silently, his lips tight. After a moment he spoke. "It is what I suspected. Virginia's mother, Eleanor Frobisher, was courted under a false name by a man named Louis Redgrave, who later vanished after a scandal involving another young woman. Eleanor was already pregnant and raised her daughter in silence. Virginia only discovered the name days before this journey." Farrow nodded grimly. "And Simon Brock, Louis Redgrave, killed her to keep that past from returning." "Exactly. But it was not only shame he feared, it was exposure and blackmail. The letter would have cost him his freedom." Poirot turned to Judith. "You did well, mademoiselle, and now we are ready." By late afternoon, Poirot had arranged a gathering in the first-class dining carriage. The curtains were drawn. Afternoon light slanted through the glass. The passengers sat in uneasy silence, faces tense, Lennox brooding and pale. Mrs. Crowhurst poised with her notebook but not writing. Captain Sellers grim-faced, Judith quiet and resolute. Poirot stood at the head of the carriage. He looked calm. His moustache, waxed to perfection, glistened like the edge of a sabre. "My friends," he began, You have travelled with a murderer. And now, before the journey ends, justice must arrive. All eyes fixed on him. You have heard perhaps that the steward Simon Brock has been arrested, but let us not simplify matters. No murderer is a mere steward. He was once Louis Redgrave, the man who seduced Eleanor Frobisher, disappeared, and was believed lost to time. Virginia uncovered his identity, and for that, she was silenced. Gasps rippled through the carriage. Poirot continued. He used deception, a fake bottle of cordial, a planted handkerchief, a misused dressing gown. He drugged her drink, slipped into her cabin using the service key, and locked the door behind him when he left. He wore Judith Rayner's robe to frame her, and he removed the bottle afterward, hiding it in a suitcase labelled "to a passenger who never boarded." He held up the locket. But this was his undoing. Virginia hid the damning letter in here. He broke the chain when removing her jewellery, unaware it contained the very evidence he feared. Poirot turned. Alfred Lennox, too, must face consequences, not of murder but of cowardice. You were prepared to take Virginia's wealth and leave her broken. You pressured her, but your sin was of the heart, not the knife. Lennox said nothing, but his hands clenched. Poirot's voice softened. Each of you played a part. Some watched, some whispered, some lied, but now the truth has come. He stepped back. Silence followed. Farrow stood slowly. When we arrive at Truro, Redgrave will be remanded to custody, and the locket will be turned over to the Crown. The train rumbled on, the station now minutes away. Poirot turned to the window. The sea glistened under fading light, vast and unmoved. He smiled faintly. "It is done," he whispered. Chapter 8. The little grey cells at work. The Seabreeze Express pulled into Truro under a bruised sky, the last of the daylight pooling in gold and shadow across the platform. Railway officials waited in quiet formation, their uniforms stark against the coastal breeze, and inside the grand dining car of the train, a final reckoning had begun. The remaining passengers had gathered again, not by force, but by inevitability. Even the reluctant understood Poirot was not a man one could avoid, nor was truth a guest that could be left outside the door. Hercule Poirot stood by the fireplace, framed by oak panelling and velvet drapes. He was immaculate, unhurried, his eyes shining with quiet certainty. No notes lay before him. He required none. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his tone neither theatrical nor soft, but absolute. "Allow me now to put together the fragments, the broken pearls, the misplaced identities, the missing bottle, and tell you the truth. The whole of it." They watched in silence. Even Inspector Farrow, seated nearby, leaned forward like a pupil before a chalkboard. "It began not with Miss Frobisher's death," Poirot continued, "but decades ago when her mother, Eleanor, was betrayed by a man who called himself Louis Redgrave. He disappeared, taking with him not just scandal, but the comfort of identity. Miss Frobisher, curious and clever, found his name in an old letter days before this journey. She boarded the Seabreeze Express intending to confront the man face to face." He let the silence stretch a moment. "That man was hiding in plain sight as Simon Brock, steward of this very carriage." Gasps filled the room. A few eyes darted to the door, behind which Brock, now unmasked, now detained, waited in guarded silence. He recognized her immediately. She was her mother's image. He saw the threat, and he acted, not in a moment of rage, but with chilling calculation. Poirot stepped forward. He fabricated the tale of the nightcap. He used a bottle he kept hidden in a trunk marked for a non-existent passenger, Mr. Lionel Ross. He poured the poisoned drink while dressed not as himself, but in a blue silk dressing gown belonging to Mademoiselle Rayner, ensuring that witnesses would later recall the colour. Poirot looked toward Mrs. Crowhurst, who sat clutching her notebook like a lifeline. Madame Crowhurst's report was accurate, but manipulated. She saw what he wanted her to see, the robe, not the man inside it. His height, his shoes, his walk, these did not match Mademoiselle Rayner's. but no one looked below the surface, and so suspicion was neatly planted. Judith lowered her gaze. Poirot's voice dropped into a gentle register. Virginia hid the letter in a locket, given to her by Miss Rayner. That chain was broken in the struggle. The locket went missing, but not forever. It was found beneath the floorboard in the steward's supply closet, proof that Redgrave removed it, recognized its importance, and meant to destroy it. He drew the locket from his pocket, held it aloft. This contained the letter, the motive, the fear, the secret. It was not greed that drove Redgrave. It was self-preservation, the knowledge that his past would end him. Poirot turned to Alfred Lennox, whose face was pale and drawn. "And you, monsieur, you did not kill Virginia, but you, too, wounded her. With charm, with false promises, with a desire for her wealth and none for her person. She was planning to remove you from her will. The solicitor confirmed she had asked for an urgent appointment. You did not know, but had she lived longer, she would have left you with nothing." Lennox said nothing. Poirot raised his chin. "The pearls?" "Removed during the staged cleaning of her body. The cufflink? Dropped by Redgrave in his haste. The lipstick on the glass? Mauve, his, not hers, from the moment he kissed the rim to mimic a lady's touch. Small details, yes. But it is always the small details that betray the lie." He smiled faintly, spreading his hands. "Et voilà. The locked room? Not locked at all, not to someone with a master key. The window left slightly ajar, a diversion. The drink, prepared in silence, by one who was trusted. The robe, the locket, the pearl, pieces of a narrative constructed to mislead." Poirot turned slowly, letting his words settle. "And now? Justice arrives." Inspector Farrow stood, signalling to the two officers near the rear of the car. "Brock will be taken into custody and transferred immediately to the magistrate's court. The letter will be handed to the Crown. The truth will speak for itself." There was a moment's stillness. Then at last, the tension broke. Judith exhaled and pressed a hand to her forehead. Mrs. Crowhurst, stunned into momentary silence, finally reached for her pen. Captain Sellers gave a short grunt of satisfaction, while Lennox stood up and walked out without a word. Poirot sat down and reached for his tea. His hand was steady. Farrow approached. "I still don't see how you knew it was Brock, not Rayner." Poirot smiled. "Ah, the robe? It had a faint scent of pipe tobacco. Miss Rayner does not smoke, but Redgrave did. Subtle, oui, but unmistakable." He tapped his temple lightly. "The little grey cells, my friend. They never lie." Farrow chuckled softly and clapped him on the shoulder. "You've done it again." Poirot looked out the window. The sea glittered beneath the fading sky, restless and eternal. He sipped his tea. "I did nothing," he said. "I merely listened to what was said and to what was not." Epilogue. 2 days later, a letter arrived at Poirot's flat in London. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, thank you for saving not only the truth, but also my name. I have returned to Devon, where I shall remain for some time. Perhaps in time I will find peace. You taught me that even silence carries weight. I will no longer carry it alone." Judith R. Poirot folded the letter, slipped it into his drawer, and returned to his breakfast. The case was closed, but in the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot, the world would always remain open to mystery, to truth, and to justice.